So today I'm going to offer a primer on language related to race. What are some of the terms that people use when talking about race and racism and anti-racism in contemporary conversations? Some of these terms you might think of as buzzwords, and sometimes that phrase has kind of a negative connotation. Oh, that's just a buzzword. But I think buzzwords are a really positive thing because language is always changing. Language is always evolving. And how exciting that we get to witness that happening, that we get to witness the emergence of new words and new phrases and wonder to ourselves, is this going to be a word that's going to stick? Is this going to be a new word that appears for a time and then goes away? So I love the idea that language is so malleable and that we get to watch that happen. When the church was born on Pentecost Sunday, until then, we think of the church didn't really exist. There were people who followed Jesus, disciples of Jesus, but the church sort of came together as a body when the Spirit fell upon the disciples on Pentecost Sunday. And we're told that when that happened, there were people gathered in Jerusalem from all over the Mediterranean Sea, all different countries speaking all different languages. They were gathered there because it was the Jewish festival of Shavuot. And so this festival where multiple people come to Jerusalem from far away to do their religious observance. And so there's lots of people in the area maybe feeling like they don't quite know how to talk to people. They don't know where they belong. They don't know where they fit. And then the Holy Spirit fell on the disciples and gave them the ability to speak in different languages, to speak in the languages of the people that were gathered there, so that those people could understand a message that they are valued, that they are worthwhile, that they are children of God, and that they belong. That's the miracle of Pentecost. Some people think Pentecost is they started speaking in tongues, like the ecstatic prayer language that nobody can understand except the person who's experiencing it. That's not what's described in Acts 2. It's described as they were given the ability to speak in other languages that help the people around them belong. So it seems fitting today that we talk about language. And we talk about language in terms of how do we, in a modern context, speak about race, this thing that divides so many of us and makes some of us feel like we don't belong. So let's start this primer with the word race itself. What is race? What race are you? It's easier to say what it is not. Race is not a biological reality. There is no such thing in biology as a white person. There is no such thing in biology as a black person or an Asian person. And even the terms that we have for race are confusing. Hispanic, Latino, Asian, South Asian, maybe by the name of the country, Filipino. We have all these different things. Geography, African American, it's geography and history together. What is race exactly? It's not any of those things by itself. We've all seen world maps too. When I was a kid, I always thought, why are they calling Europe and Asia two different things? It's clearly the same landmass. And it really looks like Europe is a peninsula of Asia. I think Europeans should really be called West Asians, is what we should do. Because there's no biological or geographical line that we can draw that separates and saying, okay, here, this race stops here, and now a new race starts. It doesn't work that way. And yet, even as race is not real, it's very real. One way that we describe how it's real and not real is we call it a social construct. That race exists because we all agree that it exists. Yet social construct is a kind of neutral term. And Ibram X. Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, speaks to that in his definition. He offers a more precise definition of race than just a social construct. He says race is a power construct. It's a power construct of collected and merged differences that live socially. Because calling race a social construct is too neutral, and race is not neutral. It's created and it's enforced by power. So it's a power construct. So it doesn't matter, in some ways, how you identify. If you identify as one thing, but those in power, those with the ability to control our bodies and have power over us with violence, decide that you're something else, then that's how they're going to treat you. For instance, if a young man is driving, and let's say this young man, his skin color is the color of coffee with heavy cream, but he has tight, curly black hair, an afro, basically. But this young man could very easily have 2 white parents. He could very easily have 3 out of 4 white grandparents. So this young man may be in a family where he very much identifies as white. But if a police officer looks at him from behind or from the side and decides that he's black, then the chances are that police officer is going to pull him over at a higher rate than a white person. So the powers that be decide what he is, and that affects his life. The same is true for his teachers in school and how they treat him, because how they see him. The same is true for a security guard in a department store and whether they follow him or not. So even if he identifies as white, those in power decide what he is to them and treat him accordingly. In Tennessee in 1910 and other states, when they were trying to enforce segregation, they actually codified a law called the one drop of blood law. They were trying to decide, okay, who's black and who's white? How do we segregate people if we can't put them in a category? And they created a law that said, if a person has 1 drop of African blood, they're black. That's the extent that we'll go to try to divide and separate each other. Race is a power construct. And that brings us to another term, and that term is whiteness. Who is white? We know that some groups in American history started out as not being white, and somehow they became white as American history progressed. The Irish were not considered white when they got here. Italians were not considered white. Jews were not considered white. And now all of those groups are considered white. How did they do that? Well, it turns out, according to Noel Ignativ, a historian, when it comes to the Irish, one of the things that they did that moved them into the white category was they started committing violence against black people. So in the Civil War in the North, when they created the draft for the Civil War, Irish mobs started blaming black people for the draft and started committing acts of violence against black people. And then white people saw that and started to move Irish over into the white category, which is so disturbing if you think about it, because it means then that whiteness is defined by the ability of a person to commit violence against a non-white person and get away with it. That whiteness there is inherently violent in its definition. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanik, in their book Critical Race Theory, an introduction, say that whiteness is a social and legal status conferred through laws, through norms, and through practices that bestow unearned advantages on a person. It's invisible to many who benefit from it, and it functions as a default and a norm. And that starts to bring us to another term, white privilege. In her essay, White Privilege, Peggy McIntosh, who's a white feminist scholar, describes whiteness as an invisible, weightless knapsack of unearned assets that only white people can count on every day. We shouldn't consider the things that the knapsack provides us are things that everybody should have. Everybody in the society should have the ability to be free and to not be targeted because of what they look like. But only white people enjoy that privilege. And so this invisible knapsack that white people get to carry around. Most people have been taught not to recognize that they have it on. And as a result, when they're challenged, they become fragile. And that brings up another phrase that you'll hear in this conversation, white fragility. Author Robin DiAngelo, in her book, White Fragility, names it and describes it as white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. If you're white and you're feeling uncomfortable with this conversation, you're experiencing this right now. And why should it make us uncomfortable to talk about race? Why should it make us uncomfortable to talk about whiteness? Because we know that there's this unfairness imbued in it. and we've been taught to not see it. And so it starts to become really uncomfortable when we bring it up. But Robin DiAngelo says that we have to remember it's not a personal failing. White fragility is not a personal failing. It's a predictable response shaped by a racially insulated environment. So if many white people have grown up in a predominantly white space where they have rarely had to confront or reflect on their own racial identity or its impact, then when it's threatened, that feels very new and very different. Their knapsack is being threatened and they didn't even know they were wearing it. Now, again, if you're starting to feel like you've done something wrong because you're white, I want to assure you, actually, guilt is not really the appropriate response for these feelings. I feel so guilty because I'm white. We don't need a bunch of guilty white people walking around. What we need are white people who recognize and see the advantages, who know that they have this knapsack on that's very hard to take off, in fact, and have to be conscious of how they respond. So if we look at a geographic metaphor maybe, and we realize that as white people, we might be standing at a higher elevation than other races in our country. And we don't think, oh, I feel so guilty that I'm up here. We're like, okay, so how are you going to respond? You didn't put yourself there. How do we respond? Do we go down? Do we help people up? What are we going to do? A lot of the things that we can do is use our voices. When we see something happening that's where our white privilege is being activated or somebody else is being targeted because they're not white, just speaking up in a board meeting, speaking up in a meeting at work can be a great way. Hey, I saw this, you wouldn't say this, I saw this person of color, just had a comment completely ignored. And now a white person's claiming credit for it. I just wanted to mention that this person over here said it first. I just want to lift them up because that was their idea and I want to name that. It's the things like that we can do. Okay, so let's move on to two more words. White space, which we mentioned in our anti-racist statement for the church, and we actually have to footnote it because it's a new word for many people. And in fact, it's helpful to pair white space with another term that you may have heard, code switching. Code switching is when a marginalized racial group changes their language, their tone, their dialect, their mannerisms, their references to make white people more comfortable. We define white space in our church's anti-racist statement as this. White space refers to physical, social, or institutional spaces that are predominantly white, where whiteness is treated as the norm, and people of color are absent or underrepresented or made to feel like outsiders. These spaces are spaces where whiteness is assumed to be the default identity, shaping expectations of behavior, speech, and belonging. When people of color enter white spaces, they may feel scrutiny, discomfort, or the burden of proving they belong. And that's where code switching happens. Now, the good news is that it doesn't take a lot of diversity to disrupt white space. We haven't quite achieved it in this church yet, but we're getting closer. A key marker of progress is that there is more than one family of a given group present on a Sunday morning. That's a milestone. When someone comes in and they see other people that look like them, it makes a difference. They might think, okay, though there's a good chance that at least that person may understand my culture, understand where I'm coming from, understand my experiences. And just having one or two other people can make a huge difference in disrupting white space. Maybe I'm not alone. Maybe I belong here. Now remember where we started, that the early church was born when the Holy Spirit gave the disciples the ability to help people feel like they belonged. So we don't need representation to make people feel and belong if we can do it within ourselves, if we have that gift. Okay, so last term, but I'm gonna take a little bit of time with it, is microaggressions. Now this is a buzzword for sure, and it's not even universally agreed upon as an accurate term. It was coined by Harvard psychologist Chester Pierce in the 1970s, so it has been around for a while. He described microaggressions as commonplace verbal, behavioral, and environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards members of a marginalized group. So in the context of our message today, I would say that microaggressions communicate we communicate through our words that a person, you don't really belong here. And we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the fact that you're not white and you're different. Now, Ibram Kendi is critical of the term microaggressions because he says they're not micro and they're more than just aggressiveness, they're violent. He says it's actually racist abuse of brown and black people that's neither minor or aggressive. So I have a video I want to show of kind of a funny, lighthearted example of microaggressions, and then we'll go to some more examples of microaggressions.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well.
Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's go small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio!
I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
You speak good English. You are so articulate. When I look at you, I don't see color. Is that your real hair? You don't act Asian. You don't look Asian. You don't dress Asian. Are you a US citizen? What are you? You're so interesting looking. She's so exotic. How did you get your hair like that? And then another sort of category, and this one's harder, is not recognize, if you're a white person, not recognize someone that you've met before who's of another race. And this is especially hard because we don't want to be afraid to interact with people. But it's known that white people, when they look at people of color, do not always distinguish them from one another and will name them the wrong name. And that's very offensive. There was a wonderful, kind, older white man at my church in Baltimore. And I was speaking with a black woman who was a brand new visitor to the church, young black woman. And this man, Fred, came up and said, "Oh, hi, Anita, it's so good to see you." Now, Anita is another young black woman in the church that has been around for quite some time in that church. And I said, "Fred, this is not Anita, this is, Sharon." And the thing to do there is to say, "I am so sorry, it's so nice to meet you." But he doubled down. And he's like, "You look just like Anita." I'm like, no, this is Sharon, Fred, she doesn't look like Anita. Trying to move on. But to him, they didn't look like each other at all. They were both young black women, but they didn't look like each other. But to him, he was having trouble. Now, if we're in that situation, the key is just apologize and move on. right? Don't double down. Don't make a big issue of it. You made a faux pas. You did something that was offensive. Apologize and move on. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail more explaining all of this, but I hope you understand that the focus that we're going for is not on our differences, but on our commonalities. What are the things that make us human? You saw it in the video. The first thing he asked her was about the weather. That's a great place to start. Human beings love to talk about weather. Doesn't matter what culture you're from. We love to talk. I'll talk about the weather for 10 minutes if you want. You're great. Other things that we can talk about, especially if you're in a church setting. What did you think of the service today? What did you think of that sermon? What did you think of that choir piece? That was really something. Have you tried the snacks? The cherries are really fresh today. If they're a new visitor, where do you live in the neighborhood? Do you live close by? How did you hear about the church? If they have children, how old are your children? What are their names? If they mention they have older children, where do your children live? Do they live nearby? What do you do for fun? Do you like sports? A lot of people like sports, more than you'd think like sports. One of the things I learned in Baltimore is that all different kinds of people could talk about either the Orioles or the Ravens. You could talk to strangers about the Orioles or the Ravens, whether you're talking to persons of different social class, different races, different genders. Everybody could talk about the Orioles or the Ravens, so that's a commonality. What are you going to do for fun for the rest of the afternoon? All kinds of things. You get the idea. So here's the point. The point is that the miracle of Pentecost was that the early Christians found ways to, in the midst of a very diverse group of people, to communicate that everybody belongs. Everybody belongs here. It doesn't matter who you are, what language you speak, what you look like, where you come from. You are valued, you are worthwhile, you belong here. And they found a way to communicate that, and the church was born. That's the work that we are called to do when we're being anti-racist. There's a lot of other things that are involved with being anti-racist, but at its core, if we can communicate to everybody who walks in this door, you are valued, you are a child of God, you belong here, then we are being an anti-racist church. Amen.